that in the beginning was matter, and that matter begot the amoeba, the worm, the fish, the amphibian, the reptile, the lower mammal, the lemur, the monkey, who begot the man who imagined God. This is the genealogy of man. Okay, that's standard. And that's what you expect atheistic evolutionists to teach. It's not what you expect people who call themselves Christians and read the Bible to teach. In fact, that idea right there cannot be reconciled with the book of Genesis for any number of reasons. Reason number one, the order is not even the same as to what order the animals and humans appear in things. Because if you were to compare, hey, when does evolution say that this particular kind of animal appeared? And then when does it say that this particular kind of animal appeared? Well, I'll give you for instance. Right now, if you read or watch any dinosaur material, what do evolutionists say dinosaurs evolved into? Birds. They suggest to us that dinosaurs evolved into birds. What's the problem with that? Genesis chapter 1, day 5. What day were birds created? Day 5. What day were land animals created? Day 6. So even the order of things doesn't fit with the reading of the first chapter of Genesis, etc. Even your order is out of whack. So what I'm telling you is that's what you expect from an atheistic evolutionist. It's not what you expect from a Christian. It's not what you expect from somebody who's reading their Bible. And yet, many times that's what you get. This is a poster that we took a picture of that was on the wall of a university that's associated with the Lord's church that is giving you the supposed origin of life. Single-celled amoeba, to the worm, to the fish, to the amphibian, to the lower mammal, to the lemur, to the monkey, to the man. In pictorial form, exactly what Charles Smith said, and it was presented on the wall of the science building at a university associated with the Lord's church. Now, if I understand it right, that's been taken down subsequently after this picture was taken, but that's what was being taught, at least in pictorial form, at this particular university. Lucy, supposedly our primate ancestor. Fact of the matter is, there are several very serious problems with this idea. The first being that Lucy probably was not even a female. It was probably simply a male, small pygmy chimpanzee. And there are a number of reasons you could show that. Don't have time to do that. But you expect from the atheistic evolutionary community the teaching that, okay, humans evolved from lower mammals, like Lucy. You don't expect that from members of the church. And yet, I guess it was a little while back now, one of the nieces of my coworker, Eric Lyons, she was going to a university associated with the Lord's church, and she was in a night class, and in that class, it was cultural anthropology, I think she was learning, and they explained to her that Lucy was our primate ancestor, and that bones such as Lucy's bones prove that humans evolved from lower mammals. Now, they do no such thing. You don't have time to deal with that. But here's what I'm saying. It is often the case that people in our culture, they want to be accepted by the very most intelligent people. And they want to be accepted in their religious church groups. So they want to say they believe in the Bible, but they also want to say that they believe in evolution. So what happens when you are holding to both of those ideas? What do you do then? Well, lots of times what happens is a person will take some ideas from the Bible and they'll take some ideas from evolution and they'll cram them together, and when they're talking to their very educated, scholarly friends, they'll say, yeah, I believe in evolution. And when they're talking to their friends at church, they'll say, yeah, I believe in the Bible. And their belief in the Bible and lots of times their belief in evolution is both of those beliefs are jammed together, and what you see is a compromise of the biblical text. And so there's a reason I call this lesson Creation Compromises. It's because when you start looking at this idea of the evolution somehow being shoved into the Bible, there's a singular point of contention that if you deal with it, you can show it could never happen. And that's the idea of millions of years, the age of the earth. Now, here's why I deal with this topic in this lesson. A lot of people, they say, Kyle, that's not a salvation issue. You shouldn't even be dealing with it. The age of the earth is not a salvation issue. You shouldn't even be dealing with it. It's not a central tenet of Christianity. It doesn't have anything to do with the gospel. Well, I got a couple reasons why that's just not a good argument. Number one, when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well and she perceived that he was a prophet of some sort, she said, okay, where are you supposed to worship? Our forefathers say you can worship on Mount Gerizim. Yours say you got to worship in Jerusalem. Where is it? I want an answer to this. Was that a salvation issue to her? Was the place where you worship a big deal to her? Is it a big deal to you? Have you ever had somebody say, well, you worship on this side of this mountain up in West Virginia. We worship on the other side. You can't be a real Christian because we worship at a different place than you. Never been an issue for you, has it? Because there are some times and some places where different things are issues to people's faith. Now, I want you to listen to this real close. Some people say, hey, age of the earth, not an issue you should even be dealing with, except for the fact that if a person gets the age of the earth wrong, then lots of times they're much more easily swayed into believing all the other stuff about evolution, like Lucy being their ancestor, etc. Now, you don't have to take my word for that. This is from students' perception of Earth's age, influence, acceptance of human evolution. This is from a Science Daily article that was written by evolutionists. And they're bemoaning the fact that they've been getting to teach evolution straight to the entire public school system, and only half of them are believing in evolution. The other half are still holding on to creation, and most of them are holding on to creation with an idea of young earth. And these evolutionists who are writing this article say, what can we do about it? How can we get them to buy evolution? And here's what they say. High school and college students who understand the geological age of the earth are much more likely to understand and accept human evolution. Now there again, these atheistic evolutionists who are writing this article, here's what they say. The role of Earth's age is a key variable that we can use to improve education about evolution. Let me translate for you. If we can get the kids to buy into the millions of years, then we can get them to believe that Lucy's their ancestor and the story of creation goes out the window. But we've got to start with that age of the earth, because if they don't think it's millions of years, then evolution doesn't have a chance at all. Now, two things on this. You can do an entire lesson on the science that proves that the multi-millions of year old dating methods are false, and that there are good dating methods that would give you, if you use the same assumptions, a young earth. We don't have time for that today. But here is where I think the Lord's church needs the most attention. About everywhere I go, I'll have people sit in this audience, and if I have 150 people, there will be 10 or 15 of them that will say, yeah, I believe in creation, but I think God took millions of years to do it. I think He used evolution to bring about what we see. So yeah, I think God did it, but I think He used evolution. Now, we can come to a real conclusion on that when we ask a single question: if there are not millions of years available, could evolution ever have been true? And the answer is no. Truth is, I'll put in parentheses, evolution could never be true anyway, because it violates the law of biogenesis, which says things reproduce after their own kind. And evolution says things don't reproduce after their own kind. They will give birth to something totally different than their own kind. Evolution virtually says dogs give birth to something other than puppies, and cats give birth to something other than kittens. And no, that's not true. Violates the fundamental law of biology. But everybody admits, if there's not millions of years, then you can't have any evolution going on. So people will go to the biblical text and they'll say, well, hold on just a second. Where could we put millions of years of time? And they'll say, well, maybe before, maybe during, maybe after. But then they'll land on, let me see if I can get to Exodus 20:11. Here's what this says. In 6 days, the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Now, if you're going to say you believe in what the Bible says, and you come to a statement that says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, and the sea, and everything, how are you going to get that to mean billions and billions of years? Well, I think some of you have probably heard how that often is presented. Supposedly, okay, well, hold on just a second. If 6 days God made everything, couldn't we say that those days weren't really days? That they were actually millions and millions of years of time. Couldn't we say that? Because, over in 1 Peter chapter 3, where it says 2 Peter chapter 3, for the Lord is not slack concerning His promises, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, that all should come to repentance. And then you start reading, for with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. So doesn't the Bible say that a day could be 1,000 years or 1,000 years a day? Isn't there some play in these words? Couldn't we get millions of years in the days? And so that's what happens lots of times. People will say, well, if 1 day could be 1,000 years, then it could be 1,000,000 years. Well, first, let me just say, you don't need the days to be 1,000,000 years each. You don't need them to be 1,000,000,000 years each. You need the days to be 2 billion years each. So it's not like you're trying to just shove in a few extra anniversaries here. You're talking about billions of years. Now, you never read in your Bible that 1 day is 1,000,000,000 years, and 1,000,000,000 years is 1 day. You don't read anything like that. So let's not pretend that we're just trying to fit a little time in here. You're talking about 13.82 billion years. Now, what would we say about that idea that the word day could mean millions of years? Does day always mean a 24-hour period in the Bible? You probably know that it doesn't. In fact, sometimes it just means the opposite of night. You remember when Jesus was talking, I must work while it is day. The night's coming when no man can work. What does he mean when he says I must work while it's day? Got to work while there's light. Okay, the night is coming. What's he mean by that? When it gets dark. So what's he talking about with that word day? 12 hours. A period of time in the future or in the past. Back in my day, we walked uphill both ways to school in the snow with no shoes. Well, you only did that 1 day? 1 period of 24 hours? Well, no. What you mean, back in my day, or the day of the Lord is going to come as a thief in the night. The 24-hour period of the Lord is going to come as a thief in the night? No. Okay, you see what we're doing there. The word day just simply means an unidentified time in the future. We don't know if it's 24 hours, don't know if it's 12 hours, don't know if it's 3 seconds. It's just unidentified. Then you have the total days of creation. You go to Genesis chapter 2, it says, and these are the acts of creation in the day when the Lord made them. It's talking about all 7 days. So you got the word day right there. That means all 7 days, and then you've got a literal 24-hour day. Now, you can answer this very, very clearly. What meaning is most often used in the text? The vast, vast majority of the time. Literal 24-hour day. So here is the only way you can ever find out what a word means. There's only one word. One way that you can ever find out what a word actually means. What does the word bear mean? B-E-A-R. Good question, isn't it? You can't tell me when I ask you that question what the word bear means. Now, you can give me multiple meanings for the word, but you can't tell me what it means in any given context unless you use the context. For instance, if I were to say, me and Brother Mark were out in the woods one day, and we were hunting, and we saw a large grizzly bear. I sat down and proceeded to change from my boots to tennis shoes, and Brother Mark said, Kyle, you can't outrun that bear. And I said, I don't have to. I just have to outrun you. Now, what do we mean when we say bear in that context? A large, furry mammal that hibernates and will eat you if you're slower than your buddy. All right, easy to understand. Now, if we say the emotional burden was too heavy for her to bear. Now, what do we mean? Now you're talking about an emotional idea of something that she's trying to hold up underneath. But then you can even take it a step further and say the load of bricks was too heavy for the kid to bear. And now what do you mean? Well, now you're talking about physically carrying something on your shoulder. So you got the same word, bear, means 3 different things, and you got to know the context to know what the word actually means. Easy to understand. Now, what's the word in Genesis chapter 1 actually mean when you look at the word day? It's actually very simple. And I'm going to state this and I'm going to prove it to you. The Hebrew writer, Moses, used every contextual available clue to show you this was and these were literal 24-hour days. Every one he had at his disposal. Number 1, The word day, the words evening and morning are used together in the Old Testament with the word day over 100 times in non-prophetic literature. Every time it refers to a literal day. Now let me tell you what I mean. In that non-prophetic literature, everybody recognize that Genesis is historic narrative. It's very, very obviously different than Isaiah, obviously different than Jeremiah. It's non-prophetic. Every time the words evening and morning are used in this kind of literature, it always means a literal 24-hour day with no exception. That means if this word day means something other than a literal 24 hours, it is a completely new Hebrew usage of the term that nobody has ever seen before in the history of the Hebrew language in this kind of literature. Okay? Evening and a morning. Now, you start looking at that idea. If it's not a literal 24-hour day, and an evening and a morning are multiplied millions of years, he divides the light from the darkness, and the light he calls day, darkness he calls night, and evening and morning. Well, if the evening is a long extended period of millions of years of darkness, what's going to happen to all those plants that you create on day 3? If an evening is a long extended period of time of millions and millions of years of darkness, do you know some of those plants require the organism, a living organism to keep them going, like the yucca moth and the yucca plant? Well, the yucca moth wasn't created until day 5. The yucca plant was created on day 3. If the yucca plant is going to live, it's going to have the yucca moth, and it comes 2 days later. But if these days were long extended periods of millions and millions of years, you create the yucca plant on day 3, boom, it's dead. You create a plant that needs light, and your evening is 500 million years, dead. So, you see, not only contextually does the word mean a literal 24-hour day, evening and morning, but then if it doesn't, you're going to have some real problems with these being multiplied millions and millions of years. Now, that's all that was saying, etc. Genesis 1:14 says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons for days and years." Okay, so we've got, in the context of Genesis chapter 1, the word day and year used together. If these days mean multiply billions of years of time, what does a year mean? Well, there's no way you could even define that term year if these days mean multiplied millions of years. So you go to Peter, and it says, with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years is one day. And so, hey, that could mean that these days are longer than a day, except for this. In this passage right here, what is the Lord trying to communicate with the word day right here? One day. What's he mean by that? A 24-hour period. What's he mean by 1,000 years? 1,365-day years. It's pretty easy to understand. Here's what that's showing you. If God wants to communicate the difference between a day and 1,000 years, he can do that. And when it says one day is as 1,000 years, it doesn't say it is 1,000 years. What's he trying to say? This is real simple in context. All he's saying is God made a promise that he was going to send his son back. We kind of forget promises sometimes. If I promise my kid that I'm going to give him $50 and that promise was 10 years ago, and my kid, sometimes I feel like they do this. They come up to me like, Dad, you remember 10 years ago you promised me I could have $50 to pay? And I'm like, no, I paid you that. Okay, if I make a promise and 10 years later somebody comes and says, you made this promise, would I forget that sometimes? Would I might say, well, things have changed, I'm not going to keep that sometimes? Well, all this text is saying is God doesn't do that. If God made the promise today, it's just as valid as if he made it 1,000 years ago, and if he makes it 1,000 years from now, it's just as good. It doesn't matter. God's promises are always good. And so if God promised that Jesus was going to come back 2,000 years ago, is Jesus going to still come back even though the promise was made 2,000 years ago? Absolutely positive. That's all that's being said there. Now, as you look at this word day modified by a number, we fail to find a single example of the use of the word day in the entire Scripture. Nowhere where it means anything other than a period of 24 hours when modified by the use of a numeric adjective. Okay, there's not an example of Scripture when you see the word day, if there's a number in front of it, it always means a literal 24-hour, always, every time. Evening and morning, day 1. Evening and morning, day 2. Evening and morning, day 3. Okay, now you understand that. Now, it's one thing to say back in my day. It's another thing to say on day 1, or the first day, or the second day. Now, when someone says back in my day, well, we understand that's an unidentified period of time, no problem. When someone says the second day we were there, now what does that mean? Well, now you're getting real specific, and you mean a literal 24-hour day. So here's what we got. Evening and morning. If we just had evening and morning, you could know it was a literal 24-hour day. But we don't just have evening and morning. We now have evening and morning and numeric adjective. So, what's Moses doing here? Everything he's got to give you that it is a singular 24-hour day, he's giving it to you. Evening and morning, numeric adjective. Now watch this. The word day appears in its plural form 700 times in the Old Testament, and it always means a literal 24-hour period when it's found in non-prophetic literature like Genesis or Exodus. Now, let's look in Exodus. For in 6, what is this right here? Yamim, literal, plural days. The Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Do you understand that in all of Hebrew literature, there's not a single example ever of the word days being plural in historic literature like Exodus and Genesis, where it does not mean a literal 24-hour day? Now, you start thinking about this, and you start realizing that there's something going on. Let's go back to the context of, work with me, where did Exodus go? Right, Exodus. What's the context of Exodus chapter 20? The Ten Commandments, remember? God starts out with, you shall know other gods before me. Don't make any graven images. Honor your father and mother, etc. And one of them is, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then he explains to you why you remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore you work for 6 days, and you rest the 7th day. That was the covenant that he made with the Israelites. Now, you start looking at this, and you start asking the simple question. You've got natural phenomena for virtually every time frame and time period that we've got in the world. What brings about a day? You got the earth on its axis. It spins around once in 24 point something hours, and that gives you a day. Okay, what brings about a year? That earth, sun, the earth going around the sun in 365.24 days, that gives you a year. What gives you a 7-day work week? What natural phenomena? Is there a moon cycle? No. Sun cycle? No. Do you know that virtually every single civilization in the history of the world has had a 7-day week? Now, where'd they get it? Now, here's the fact of the matter. If you believe in an all-powerful God, could God have created the world in 6 seconds? If he wanted to. Could he have done it in 6 billion years? If he wanted to. Could he have done it in 6 nanoseconds? 6 picoseconds. Could he have done it in any time you want? He could have done it any time you want. So why does he say he did it in 6 literal days and stopped working on that 7th day? Well, then he tells the children of Israel, here's why I did that. So that you work 6, now hold on, this is real easy to follow. You work how long? 6 days. Okay, how long are those days? Millions of years? You work 6 long periods of millions of years and rest on 1 long period of millions of years. Does that make any sense? None at all, does it? In fact, God is telling you, I created the world in 6 literal 24-hour days, and I rested on the 7th literal 24-hour day so that you would have a pattern for your work week, and every civilization from the beginning of time has followed that pattern, and there's not a natural phenomenon, one, that would give it to you, except if that's how God created the world. And so you see, the context there has to be a literal 24-hour day. It has to be. Otherwise, what he's telling the children of Israel wouldn't make any sense. And let's continue to follow this line of reason. Supposedly, and now check this out. This is very interesting to me. 13.82 billion years ago, it never really happened. There's really never been 13.82 billion years. But if it did, you need to look up here and see this illustration. My outstretched arms, if you start, we'll start the explosion over here. If you start the alleged Big Bang, which itself never did happen, but if you started it right here, and this was the beginning, and this is now, and my arms outstretched represent 13.82 billion years. If you started at 13.82 billion, then you would have man arriving on the scene. This is the beginning, right? You would have man arriving on the scene at the tip of my middle fingernail, supposedly 5 million years ago. 13.82 billion, man arrives at the very end of creation, the tip of my middle fingernail. Well, according to the Bible, when does man arrive? Well, you start reading that Jesus said, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. When does the Bible say humans started being here? 13.81998 billion years ago, or from the beginning of creation? Now, let me ask you this question. Does it look to you like Jesus thought humans evolved over multiplied millions of years from lower primate ancestors? No. In fact, you would never in your life read a straightforward reading of the text of Genesis or any New Testament text and think that the Old Testament writers or Jesus himself ever thought that, hey, God created the world, but he used evolution to do it. It just is not how you read the Bible. You see, according to Mark chapter 10, verse 6, which tells us exactly what Jesus just said, man was there from the beginning. Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made. So what are we saying? Humans have been here from the beginning. The fact of the matter is there simply is no room for the idea of millions of years to be shoved into the Bible. Sometimes I kind of view it like this. You've probably seen Cinderella. I don't know if you've seen the little Disney Cinderella. Cinderella, very interesting story that most all of us know. Cinderella goes, she's at the ball, and she's got to leave by 12. She's running a little late and leaves her glass slipper. And the prince finds the glass slipper, and he starts going around to all the houses in the kingdom, and he starts trying to fit people's foot into the slipper. Now, the scene that I remember the most is when he goes there to Cinderella's house, and the two stepsisters claim to have been the girl who was there at the ball. And the one is very short, and she has a very wide, thick foot. And she tries to shove her foot into the slipper, and she puts one side of it in, and the rest of it flops over the side, and she puts another side in, and it flops over. It doesn't fit at all, so the prince is like, okay, yeah, your foot doesn't fit. And then he gets the tall, really, really tall, slender sister who's got that long, long foot, and she tries to put hers in, and she shoves her toe in, and then she tries to flop the heel in, and half of her foot sticking up, and it just doesn't fit. Their feet just don't fit in the slipper. That, to me, is exactly what's going on when somebody tries to grab the millions of years of alleged evolution and they try to shove it into the Bible. It's like they're trying to shove it into a place that it just doesn't fit. God created everything in 6 literal 24-hour days. So the question then is, well, so how old is the earth? And the answer to that, it's real simple. It's 5 days older than humans. Thank you. Appreciate y'all being here. Enjoyed it. Seriously though, okay, so what kind of answer does that give you? Well, it actually gives you not a bad answer at all. Because when you start looking at how long humans have been around, you can really get a good concept of this. From us to Jesus is about how many years? Oh, about 2018 years, approximately, being AD in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini. So we've got about 2,000 years to Jesus. From Jesus to Abraham, about how many years was it? Generally speaking, most everybody, secular historians and biblical historians, recognize this. David was around in about 1000 BC. Moses around in about 1500, 1450 BC. Abraham around about 400 years before that. So you're looking at 2000 BC. So from us to Jesus, 2,000 years. From Jesus to Abraham, 2,000 years. Now all we've got to know is from Abraham to Adam. Now, from Jesus to Abraham was about 55 generations. From Abraham to Adam was about 20 generations. So how many years was it? Well, do you know, when you start looking in Genesis chapter 5, you can read the genealogies, and they explain to you when so-and-so was this old, he had his son. When he was this old, he had his son. When he was this old, he had his son. And you can take those dates, and you can add them up, And you get right at 1,600, 1,700 years. Now you say, well, hold on just a second. Well, why in the world would 55 generations be 2,000 and 20 generations would be 1,700? Well, there's a good reason for that. How old were some of those people living in Genesis chapter 5? I mean, Adam lived to be 930. You had several people living past their 900s, so you'd have had extended times for the generations. So you got 20 generations, you've got approximately 2,000 years. So generally speaking, from us to Jesus, 2,000, Jesus to Abraham, 2,000, from Abraham to Adam, even though it's only 20 generations, you still got right at about 2,000 years. Now, lots of people will say, Kyle, you mean to tell me that you're going to maintain that the earth is only about 6,000 years? Yeah. Now, listen to this. I want you to listen close. There's not a single scientific data producing method that disproves that statement. You're going to be told there is. You're going to be told there are all kinds of dating methods that give you millions and millions of years. I'll give you an example of one of them. Who was it? Somebody's telling me this is interesting, and I'll expand it a little bit. They were it was one of the visitors yesterday who was talking about how he and his son were at one of the caves, and the girl, teenager, she was explaining to him how stalactites, stalagmites come about. And she said, these stalactites, they grow 1 inch every 1,000 years. So if you see a 3-inch one, then it's 3,000 years old. And said the dad looked down, and right there was a 82 lumber board that was under about 3 inches of stalagmite. And he said, wow, that board's been here for 3,000 years. And the girl said, what are you talking about? He said, well, there's stalagmite material that's about 3 inches above it right there. He said, she just quietly said, we're moving on, and just went to the next thing. You know, we've got pictures under the Lincoln Monument that were taken in the piping we know was there since the 50s. And there are several feet of stalagmites, stalactites. Now here's how I learned stalactite, stalagmite. Work with me. That it's a stalagmite when it grows up from the ground because you might trip over it. It's a stalactite because it hangs from the ceiling and it hangs there really tight. So these are stalactites hanging from poles off the Lincoln Memorial underneath it, the piping, and some of them are several feet long, and we know they've only been there for 40, 50, 60 years. Now, every one of the dating methods that you will ever hear that supposedly gives an old earth are all based on the same assumptions. 3 primary assumptions. Number 1, I won't go into all the assumptions, but that the rate of accumulation or decay has always been the same, that nothing's touched the sample in the last supposed 4.5 billion years, and that the sample had a certain amount of something there or not there to start out with. Things that you just simply don't know. If I were to hold up a candle and I were to light it and you watch this candle burn and I ask you, hey, how long has the candle been burning? Well, you're going to have to know some stuff how tall was the candle before it started? Has it been burning at the same rate because maybe the oxygen level in this room started getting much, much less because it feels like the air conditioner went off and we're all burning up hot? And I don't know where that came from, but maybe that's what happened and the burning started doing. Okay, you see the problem. There's not a single piece of data collection method anywhere that would prove that the earth is not 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Now, if you let me use the same assumptions that all the old earth stuff uses, then I can produce some 60, 70 different methods that will give you an age of the earth in thousands of years, sometimes even in hundreds of years, although we know that can't be the case because the dating methods are flawed. But every single scientific discovery to date can be fit within a framework of 6,000 to 10,000 years, regardless of what you hear in most of your textbooks and outlets of that nature. So, as we look at this, do you need to fit evolution into the Bible? Number 1, not only does it not fit, but you don't need to fit it because it never was there in the first place. You see, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that story that you read about in Genesis, a straightforward, easy to understand story that you can literally tell your 3rd grader and they can understand every bit of it. That in 6 literal 24-hour days, God created the world and everything in it. And He created humans in His own image from the dust of the ground. And He created that first woman from the rib of that first man and brought her to Him. and those two became one flesh, and that was the pattern for families for all time. And that was the air conditioner that just popped on. And for the next 10 minutes, we're going to really enjoy it. It's awesome. Was it ever necessary to try to accommodate the false idea of evolution into the true account of biblical creation? Never has been. In fact, I think about it in my mind, just like that little foot trying to go in that clear little glass slipper, it just doesn't fit. You guys have been so patient with all the snow that's been on the board. You've been so patient with Dane and all the rest of these guys and myself. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here. There again, I always say this. Two things about me being here and you being here. When I show up at a congregation that has 100 members, generally speaking on a Sunday, and at their seminar they have 150 or so, that proves to me that you have been thinking about it, you have been praying about it, and you have been doing the work that it takes to make this a success. Now, God's Word's not going to return to Him void, but it's our responsibility to try to get people to hear it, and I can tell that you have done that. You have taken this seminar seriously, you have thought about it and prayed about it, you have done what it's taken to get me here, and you've done what it's taken to get all of you and the visitors, etc. here, and it is really exciting to see. Now, I really do travel all over the world, multiple times a year, but it thrills my soul, and it doesn't matter how big the group is. So I speak to sometimes a group of 12,000, and sometimes I speak to a group of 12. But when it's a congregation of 100 that has 145, 150 people that come, it thrills me to be a part of that effort because I know that you have done what it's taken to be serious about this and you really care about it. And so, yeah, okay, I'm away from my family. I don't like that at all. And I'm away from other stuff that I would be doing, but I think it's very valuable and I'm willing to do it because you're willing to do it. And I can't tell you and the elders and the people who are responsible how much I appreciate you letting me be a part of this because it's really exciting to me that you've done this. So thank you for letting me be here, and thank you so much for you being here, and I really appreciate the kind attention that you have paid to what we have said. We're going to have a very brief question and answer period of about 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to wrap this up. If you have any questions, that it's really simple. I've got one rule: no question is a bad question. The only rule is you can only ask questions to which I know the answer. That's it. So just have at it. Any question you want, as long as I know the answer, about anything. Could be about dinosaurs, creation, evolution, whatever you got, and I'll see what I can do. My favorite answer is I don't know. So let's have it. You just raise your hand and say, yes, what you got? Now there's a reason I don't go over carbon dating. Here's why. Because it's very technical and boring, but I let somebody ask the question and then I explain it in technical, boring terms, but I say then you can't blame me for it being boring. So I'm glad that you asked that. Here is, I'm going to put it in a nutshell, my level terms, layman terms to understand this. Now, if I had Mike Houts here, let me tell you what we did. We were, I think in Murfreesboro there. I was delivering my stuff, and then Mike got up, and he did carbon dating and stuff. And at the end of that, we had an atheistic organization that was sitting right on the front row. There were about 12 of them. And one of them raised his hand and said, well, what about carbon dating when it does this? And Mike rattled through the absolute perfect answer that had no response. None. I mean, it was just, and you know, it was all the technical stuff. He studied it, he knows all the stuff, all the half-lives of all the breakdown and everything. And at the end of it, the atheistic guy who answered the question said, this is all he could say. This is all anybody could say. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. And just went on. I mean, and that was it. The dating methods, and I'm going to explain it to you. And you're going to have to stick with me, okay? All right. Here's what every okay, first though, let me explain to you the difference between carbon dating and radiometric dating. Nobody uses radiometric dating to give you millions and millions of years, although you think they do. Carbon dating is used on stuff that at one time was living and is not now. And you, as you're alive, you take in a certain carbon molecule And then when you die, your body starts letting it out. Okay, and the way that carbon dating works is they study the remains of once living things and how much carbon has gone out of them, and they say, okay, this is how old that thing was. Now, the problem with carbon dating is the same as all of them. It's based on assumptions that they don't know for sure. The assumption that carbon has been leaking from this at the same amount of time, that the atmospheric conditions have been the exact same. There always are assumptions based on all of these dating methods. And here's what else you run into. Okay, they carbon dated the muscle fiber of a musk ox's hip, and they dated it to 14,000 years ago. They then carbon dated the hair on the back of the musk ox hip to 7,000 years ago. So you had a hairless musk ox that lived for 7,000 years before it ever grew any hair. Okay, you see the problem with it. The assumptions used for the dating methods are flawed all the way around. Now, if you grant the assumptions, okay, yeah, that's exactly right. But you don't know the assumptions. And now, work with me, I'm going to show you what that means. Radiometric dating is how you get the millions or billions of years. And it works with radioactive elements that break down into other elements. So, let's say that you've got uranium-238, and we got 100 ounces of it. We're going to say this is 100 ounces of uranium-238. It has a half-life, supposedly, of 4.5 billion years. Now, here's what that means. In 4.5 billion years, half of this 100 ounces is going to have changed from uranium-238 to lead. Okay? All right, so now, we now have a sample. You have 50 ounces of uranium-238, 50 ounces of lead. How old is this sample? Now, that's the trick question. And here's why. They will find the sample. It'll have 50 ounces of uranium-238, 50 ounces of lead, and they'll say that sample is 4.5 billion years. Now, here's the challenge. Assumption number one. No lead was in it to start out with. Okay, what if there was 22 ounces of lead in it to start out with, and then the uranium has been breaking down, and it's only broken down into 2 ounces? Well, you're going to have a real problem with that, because you don't know how much of the daughter element was in it to start out with. It breaks down into lead, but you don't know how much lead was in it to start out with. Let me show you how this would mess you up. Go to somebody's swimming pool. You see the hose pipe is in the swimming pool, and you pull it up, and it's running, and you see how long it's been running, and it's running at a rate of 100 gallons an hour. And there are 3,000 gallons of water in the swimming pool. How long has it been running? 30 hours? Is that what you'd say? Oh, but here's the question. How much water was in it before you started turning the hose pipe on? Could be that there was 2,800 gallons in it before you turned the hose on, and you've only been running for 2 hours just to fill it up to the top. If you don't know how much was in it to start with, then your time is absolutely off. So when you say, hey, I got this and it proves a certain age, how much was in it to start with? Can you ever know that? No. Number one, you can't ever know that. Number two, the rate of decay has always been the same. Okay, now you've watched it for 100 years, and you've said the rate of decay is 4.5 million. Now, you haven't been around for 4.5 million years. You've just watched it for a limited amount of time, and you've said, well, that rate of decay is 4.5 billion years. Could it be you've got the rate of decay wrong, or that the rate of decay fluctuates or alters or changes? Could be. Let's see how that works. You go to the woods and you see a guy, he's chopping down trees. You watch him, he chops down a tree, it takes him an hour. There's 24 trees on the ground, how long has he been chopping? It's a trick question, isn't it? Well, if he's been always chopping at 1 tree an hour, it took him 24 hours. But could it be that his quota is 24 trees, and that early on in the day when he had a sharp axe and a full belly, he was chopping 4, 5, 6 trees an hour, and this last one, all he had to do was chop 1 more, and so he chops 1 more. You look at the 1 tree that he chopped, and you say the rate's always the same. He's been chopping for 24 hours when he's really only been chopping for 5 or 6 or 8. See the problem there? Okay, and the next situation. Number one assumption is nothing was in it to start out with. Number two assumption is the rate's always been the same. And number three assumption is nothing's touched it for 4.5 billion years. Could some water seep in and add some lead to this? Yeah, probably. Could some water seep in and take some lead away from this? If you got 4.5 billion years, the idea that nothing's touched it in 4.5 billion years, that's really going to be hard for me to grant you. Because probably something's happened to it in 4.5 billion years, and I'm not going to say that is a pristine, untouched sample that nothing has gone through or nothing has touched in 4.5 billion years. Now, here's the real kicker. Those are all the theoretical reasons that prove that the dating methods don't prove the age of the old Earth. But here's the real kicker. Isn't there a place where you could go and find rocks that are being newly created? Sure. In fact, we do it all the time. Hawaii, often you'll have a volcano that will be creating rocks that are these igneous type of rocks that supposedly you can date. Here's what happens when you do. You'll know that a volcanic island formed 200 years ago. When you date it, what age should it give you? 200 years. Well, you'll date it with 5 different methods, and you'll get anywhere from 30 million years to 300 million years, and they pick the one that they want. Now, here's what's interesting. Every place where we know the age of the rock, every one, the dating methods don't work. Let that sink in. So every place we know the age of the rock, the dating methods don't work. We know for a fact this rock right here in Hawaii on this volcanic island is 200 years old. When we go and date it, it gives us millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years. So we know it didn't work there, but we then know it does work every place we don't know the age of the rock. See the problem with that? So that's, in a nutshell, the radiocarbon dating. Now, if you want to get real serious, there are 2 journals that are scientific discussions of research done by a group called the RATE group that deal with these radiometric dating methods. You can get a abbreviated version on a popular level called Thousands Not Billions by a guy named Donald DeYoung that walks you through all the stuff that I just talked about. And it's really great reading if you want to fall asleep at night. It's really exciting. Yes?
How are you received on college campuses? Are you invited to speak for liberal type institutions?
Here's how. Virtually every university has a Christian organization that is student-led. And so when the student-led organization invites you to come in, you can come. And that's the bottom line. The participation is pretty good. Lots of times, I mean, like when we go to, I'm trying to think, the Mississippi State, I think it was, we had probably 300, 400 people show up. And like if the atheistic meeting was that night and they let out and they came to the deal. So, but mostly it's done by the student Christian organizations. So like at the University of North Alabama, where it was down in Florence, the Christian Student Center, it's the student center that is associated with the Lord's Church, they got the debate up to do with me and Bart Ehrman. And so he's a professor at the University of North Carolina. UNA is just what we would call just a secular, governmental operated state school. But because it's the Christian Student Center, well, then they can rent the venue, and we had, I think, about 1,500 people that showed up for that one, and they just put it on. So, some, but not much. As far as you'll get some atheistic pushback from it, but just as far as like when you show up, any kind of protest or demonstration or anything like that, not much at all. That's a good question. So if you could get with the, Fairmont State, we could get on the campus. We do sometimes, and your best bet is to get Mike House to come do it because he does a phenomenal job. All right, good question. Another question. Other questions? If you don't ask questions, we're just going to make you sit here for 10 minutes. It's okay. You might as well ask a question. We've got 10 more. Come on. Well, yes, sir. No, 6 to 10,000 years old. And the reason that I say that is when you start looking at those genealogies, there are things about those genealogies where it will say, well, Terah was 70 years old when he had Abraham, Nahor, and well, what that means is he was 70 when he started having those, and the oldest one was born when he was 70, but the other two could have been born when he was 78, 80, etc. So there's a little play in those genealogies, but within a few decades or a few hundred years, certainly nothing like millions.
I'd satisfy myself between 8 and 8,500.
Yeah. So that's what I always just say, between 6 and 10, just because that would be pretty specific, nailing down even to that. Good question. Yes?
How would you suggest, or what would you suggest, a teenager or a college student to present some things about the pepper moths and Haeckel's embryos? How would they present something like that to a professor? I'm going to guess you probably have some AP stuff on that.
We've got, the question is, how would I suggest that a student present material like this to a professor? Now, here's the challenge that you've got. A professor holds the microphone. So he can let you say one or two things until he can trip you up and then cut you off and go from there. But I do think that we as Christians have to be willing to stand up for what we believe and to be willing to, in a loving, kind way, present that. And let me tell you, let me give you an example. Had a kid, I'll say a kid, he was probably 20 years old or so. His professor was teaching this creation compromises stuff. He raised his hand one time in class and said, hey, I think there's some evidence that would prove that the earth is not millions and millions of years old. He, back and forth, had a very brief exchange with the professor, but then he called us and said, I've got 38 other students in my class. Will you send me 38 books that you have on creation compromises that I can give one to all my fellow students? And we sent him the 38 books free of charge, and he gave them to all the students in his class. So I do think one of the best ways to do it is respectfully and kindly register a differing opinion. But there's no way you're going to get a chance most of the time to present that in any type of robust way that will be able to give them the information. So then I would just say, find a way like that guy did to get them a more in-depth resource, because here's what we know. Out of the 30 kids that are in that class, 28 of them are probably just thinking about making an A and don't really care what the subject is, but 2 of them might have had a serious thought about this and want to know the truth on it, and getting them the material might hit those 2 kids. So that's what I would suggest. It's a very good question. All right, last question. This is it. We're done. Somebody comes up with one more question, you can get us out of here. What you got? Let me say this. Apologetics Press has been going now for right at 40 years. Virtually every question you will ask on this kind of stuff, we have someone well qualified who has answered the question on our website. Our website is apologeticspress.org. If you get one of the little bookmarks back there, one of the Reason Revelation magazines, or even one of the Discoveries, I think the Discovery might even have the website on it, that will take you to our website. Now, this is not, I'm not bragging in any sense of the word, but our website is one of the most often used websites in the world for questions of this nature by people of any type of Christian, like that would call themselves Christians at all. And what I mean by that is, we've got more stuff on our website on alleged Bible contradictions than anybody else in the entire world to my knowledge. There's nothing like it anywhere. You go to our website, you hit Genesis, and there is an answer to every alleged contradiction that touches Genesis. You hit Matthew, answer to every alleged contradiction that touches Matthew. Literally hundreds and hundreds of them. If you type in Christian evidences, Apologetics Press comes up, I think, very first on Google. And we don't pay for that. It's just that's how many people come to our site to access our information. And so if you've got any question on this stuff, you will find a lot of it. I mean, I'm talking 95, 98% of it In fact, if you have a question that we haven't answered, most of the time what happens is people send me an email that says, hey, do you have this on your website? And I look, and if I don't find it, we write one. So if it's not there, send me an email, kyle@apologeticspress.org, and we'll write an answer and put it out there. But any of this stuff we've dealt with, if you want more in-depth, if you want a 5-minute video on it, we got that on our website. You can get any chunk of it you want. You want a 5,000-word article? We got that. You want a 10-minute video? We probably got that. You want a little tract on it? We got that. Any of that, we've probably got on this stuff. I'm going to count that as the last question, and I'm going to turn it. You got any more announcements? Anything else? Anything? Well, let's close with a prayer, and then we will be dismissed. Let's pray. God, as we get to talk about your awesome creation, it's so fascinating, and your text, the Bible, answers so many questions for us. In fact, every question